Please take seat. We're going to start. Please take seat. We're going to start. You don't have to leave, but yeah, we'd like you to sit down. Hello. Please, if you're not staying for the session, please leave the room. Otherwise, sit down and be quiet. Let's start. My name is Jean Pisani-Ferry, member of the Cercle des Économistes, and next to me, four speakers, members of the panel who will introduce themselves. Can you introduce yourself? Reza Aliyev. Je suis
International Center and coming from Azerbaijan. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is André Lezoukou-Pietri. I'm running the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, which is a technology financing agency, pan-European, and our mission is bold, is to build the technology bricks that will make Europe's competitiveness and sovereignty in the future. So a DARPA type of organization, high risk, high reward. Thank you.
Bonjour, je suis
Nicolas Dubourg. I'll do it in French. I think I'll be more at ease. And I run a company, investment company called Result. We do mainly invest in French companies with private capitals. We invest in larger companies, mainly tech and industry. And we're also growing smaller growing companies. And right now, we are doing a fund leveraging for critical and dual technologies to help for our sovereignty and to. Désolé, on a un petit problème de traduction. Je suis bas.
We're an EU think tank working on economic policy in Berlin.
So, let me start by introducing the panel. Sorry. Europe is used to depend on to be highly dependent on fossil fuels, and this was reminded by the war in Ukraine. It was reminded by the war in Ukraine was gas, and it was reminded to us by more recently, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that Europe ended up being highly dependent on oil. So we knew that, but it's nothing new, but it became obvious in a very nasty way. Now, the answer in principle would be to speed up transition, to accelerate transition to fossil fuels, which of course creates a new dependence, a dependence essentially vis-à-vis China, because the European Union imports roughly 90% or even more of its critical material, of this rare earth, of its lithium, and other critical material, and it imports them from China, and therefore we realized soon that here there was a new dependence, and in a way we were bracing for changing one dependence for another. So it is even more so the case that artificial intelligence will cause an explosion of demand for such critical materials, and therefore we are, in principle, we are highly dependent again. Taking this into account, the European Union introduced a new legislation called Critical Raw Material Act, and which targets ambitious goals for 2030. And well, the first one is not highly ambitious. We want to extract 10% of our needs from the different materials from the ground, but 40% of transformation of such materials in Europe, which changes versus the current situation, because China controls, extraction and refining, and also 25% of recycled materials. So it's also very ambitious, and total less than the objective is that we should get dependence that and no country would represent more than 65% of our supplies in critical materials. So that's the ambition. Now the question is, do get the means to achieve that? And in the meantime, something happens that's quite significant, which is the proposal by the US to have a tax silica, and which was initially initiated by the Trump administration, which was then joined rapidly by Japan, Australia, UK, but which has just been actually got a new member at the end of June by the European Union. So we will discuss that. It's important, and the essential idea is to cover the entire supply chain of treatment of critical materials for AI. The problem is that there is no means, no formal commitment, and for the time being, it is purely a declaration of intent. So, question is it going to go far, or is it going to stop slowly after the start? So this is where we stand. This is the topic of today's discussion, and with no further ado,
Thank you so much, John. And sorry that I can't speak in French. For next year, I promise I'll be better in that. And so just wanted to share a couple of my thoughts on that. And our panel is called Who Controls the Strategic Resources? But me coming from Azerbaijan, as you mentioned, the oil and gas kind of as being the energy security part of it, but with the critical minerals, with the rare earth being an increasingly important part of the strategy for the energy diversification, for everything, basically, from EVs to AI data centers, etc. I would propose to look at it from who controls the systems that transform those resources into power. And that's where the supply chain comes in, because it's not just about having the resources on the ground, but it's also about you extract it, you transport it, you refine it, you finance it. Some of our colleagues will talk about it. You insure it, you manufacture it. So having this full supply chain, which is secure and trusted, is very, very important. And that kind of moves it from the territories as a concept to the value chains and integration of it. And from that, when I look at, for example, the importance of the critical minerals, the EVs, for example, electric vehicles are using 6 times more critical minerals than traditional internal combustion engine cars. The offshore wind uses 12 times more minerals than the gas power stations. So when you look at those things, and I know it's a very hot topic on this hot day, so maybe just I want to focus on three which are really particularly interesting for me. One is cobalt, being such an important one. So you have 3/4 of the all mining comes from People's Republic of DRC, of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but 2/3 of it is produced in China. Impossible to catch up because China has been investing for 40 years in all of the processing. It's not the most environmentally friendly activity as well to do. It's very costly, billions of dollars. So I know there is a big now move in Europe to catch up, but it's very ambitious to have the 40% within here. The second, which is not the rare earth and maybe less glamorous, but I think very, very important, is copper. when you look at copper, it's a very important part for the electrification. Without copper, you will not have the electrification, you will not have the grids, you will not have the batteries, you will not have anything. So the energy transition really needs that. So this is basically oil and oil pipelines were fueling 20th century. Nowadays, copper is what wires the 21st century. And the third one, which might be a bit controversial as well, but I think really important, is that, because everyone talks about lithium and cobalt, but something that I want to focus your attention on is the importance of helium. We don't really think about it, we don't really talk about the helium as the important part, but I would actually put it into the critical minerals part, because you have, unlike metals, helium cannot be manufactured, and once it's out, it goes to space. But at the same time, the importance of it for everything from semiconductors to MRI scans to quantum computing to birthday balloons, everything in between is very, very important. So when we think about that, let's keep that as well. And nowadays, with the Qatar was the largest producer of helium, and now with the regional war in Middle East, the production has gone down by 40%, and it will not be able to catch up in the coming 5 years, so to go back to pre-war volumes. So that's very, very important. And what those things show us, the war in Ukraine, war in Near East, COVID, etc., is the fact that really exposes the fragility of the world. And what we need there is the resistance, right, and making it much stronger. And with that, when I look at it, coming from the Central Asia Caucasus, I think, as a voice there, not less, let's say, European, but more of the Central Asian Caucasus, it is becoming a really, really hot part, because you have Kazakhstan with a lot of uranium, a lot of critical minerals. 85% of Mendeleev table is in Kazakhstan. You have Uzbekistan, which is investing in copper and rare earth development. You have Azerbaijan moving from oil and gas. We had Ursula von der Leyen yesterday in Azerbaijan talking about that, but moving actually to become the transitional hub. And you see the interest from all big powers there. So when we think about who controls the strategic resources, you have President Trump's administration wants to do the TRIP, which is Trump's route for international peace and prosperity, which will link Central Asia to Europe and maybe Turkmenistan as well, was a massive fourth largest energy holder. You have C5+1 moving to C6+1 as the Central Asian countries. And that middle core, and then of course you have China investing into Georgia, into the Anaklia port. So I think those kind of the logistical and transportation hubs will be another source of power that we'll be focusing on. But thank you.
Very much, André.
Thank you very much. Je vais le faire en français, donc peut-être.
So 3 parts. One, if there is one thing to bear in mind, is the first one, then I'll talk about the new power geography, and third, give you leads for hope on the strategic level. One, what I want you to bear in mind is that this story of rare earths, Alexandre said, for 20 years that we've been asking the single market of capitals, and in a normal company, the sixth CEO would have been fired for not doing it. Same thing for rare earths. It's the first time there was an embargo on the rare earths between China and Japan, where the Prime Minister from Japan went to visit a sanctuary in Tokyo where there were war criminals buried, and China reacted in 2010 by blocking access to all rare earths, prices multiplied by 10, and since for the last 16 years it's taking place. So when I hear people that we are surprised by this dependence, and it's an existential risk for European industry, renewable, missile guiding systems, electrical vehicles, and electrical motors, well, there's a lot of sloppiness, and we have to question ourselves, and heads have to roll down as to our ability in member states in the European Union to anticipate, because clearly this is a disaster in terms of anticipation. Now, when it comes to power, clearly today power is, it has been said, power has been shifted from the producers, the mines, to the refining. Today, China, the geography, the geology is well distributed throughout the world, unequal but well distributed. Where China for 15 years built a amazing position in between 70 and 90, almost 99% on refining of high magnet, for its magnets. Well, it's purification system. Since the magnets are used for their conductivity, magnetism, and they can be very, they have to be highly pure. As soon as they're in a purity, there is a risk of short circuits because it dendrites and overheating and so on. And so we need something highly pure. So China concentrated on that. And this was not a fatality, it was, in 98, the Solvay plant in La Rochelle would refine 48%, half of the rare earths in the world. Oh, there was less, but it was. So why did we change this? Because the refining process of rare earths, remember, God, we use lead, arsenic we use them now, solvents, a lot of water, and often in the lanthanum especially, there are radioactive waste. So power today is for the refining. Second, the interdependence is more changed into to have to think interdependence between major markets and truly there is a power to do the consideration on that. And even producers of resources, look at what the Republic of Congo did, try to do an embargo on this export of cobalt, and which has been mentioned, except that when China and the US agreed for a break, well, it was on the back of the producing countries, and they are not. So today it's no longer an issue of mines, but who controls the flows and who controls the refining. And 3 points where we could talk more about that, but anyway, strategic point I want to talk about. One, Europe is truly in the worst situation when we look at the demand and the assessed on rare earths for permanent magnets is ×6 between now and 2030, so within in the 36 months. And when you talk about lithium, we consider it's ×10 now in 2030, or even ×50. So, it's science fiction, and our production capacity was increased by 0 since the program has been taken into account. So we got mines in the Allier that might come in 2031 or 32. When you see that even countries, semi-authoritarian country like Serbia, cannot have their population accept lithium mines in their country, can you imagine the problem they will have in Europe? Europe is in a poor position. Second, victims. Second, we have collateral victims. That is today. In 2025, this activation of rare earths as a strategic weapon was a conflict between the US and China. And this is Europe that's paying the price. So now we have a problem, 6 November. So it's dead, but exactly in 6 months. So we don't want to take this as a break. Sorry, I have to stop the translation for 5 minutes. I'm sorry, there is an emergency.
Quand même dire, c'est les pistes. C'est-à-dire aujourd'hui, où est la connexion avec le recyclage? Le recyclage nous permettrait d'aller de 1 à 20% de notre consommation d'aimants permanents. Où est-ce qu'elle est la capacité de trouver des alternatives? Vous le citiez aujourd'hui, sans aimants permanents, pas d'éoliennes offshore. Aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas cette connexion entre stratégie terres rares, stratégie recherche, voire stratégie digitale. Et la troisième chose, très similaire au sujet de défense aujourd'hui, c'est qu'on pense règlement, alors que le vrai sujet des terres rares aujourd'hui, c'est quelle est la capacité industrielle qu'on est capable de mettre en face. Donc c'est comme aujourd'hui un drone ou une capacité militaire, c'est pas juste le produit qui compte, mais c'est est-ce qu'on est capable de produire ça à l'échelle. Donc c'est vraiment industriel de tous les pays européens, unissez-vous.
Merci. Nicolas. Alors, je vais essayer de surtout pas redire ce qui a été dit et d'essayer de prendre l'angle d'un investisseur qui n'investit pas d'ailleurs dans les minerais, mais qui a des activités qui sont très liées à l'utilisation de ces minerais, de ces métaux ou de l'énergie. Donc, les besoins de ces matériaux est en croissance de manière évidente. On vient d'en parler. Je crois que les montants d'investissement.
Sorry, the investment amounts that are expected to follow the pace is more than $500 billion in worldwide for energy transition. And so we leave aside everything that's digital, which is enormous when you consider the data center project. And a personal comment, how do you do this knowing that there are a lot of transitions to finance? The aging populations. You have to make choices and concentrate on where we can be the most efficient. And the question of these strategic resources, well, I think we need to address this through collaboration, cooperation with countries, diplomacy, because we won't resource everything in Europe. We can't create as many mines as we should in Europe. It's not possible. It takes years, tens, decades, and also we're talking as a private investor. It's not possible to invest in mines. It's a lengthy process, a lot of capex. The return on investment is tied to a commodity, the price of which is set by the market in most cases. If you take lithium, for example, it got tenfold, multiplied by tenfold, and multiplied by 2 again with the Iranian crisis, because and to so we have private money. I'm sorry, I was an interruption. We're in general in zones where the governance is low, to say the least, or things that are not easy to manage for us. So what happens? What can we do? So there are certain projects in Europe. Europe wants to support these projects. They're interesting. We need to take a close look at them. They need to be, some have collaterality. It's not pure raw materials. There's a part of energy, which is interesting to make them more profitable, let's say, more simpler to analyze in time. And on the other hand, what I find interesting is that we can work on technologies using these minerals, this ore, to transform it and keep added value in our countries. In the battery, chain electric batteries, for example, we're investors in the Vercor company, which is building a huge plant in Dunkirk to deliver to Renault of NMC, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, the raw materials used for that. So there, of course, there's an issue of supply. What will be in the cathode, which is the key element of these batteries. And there's some supply chain for that is done in China, because the battery raw materials comes from China. Also, the CEO of Orano here. There's a project that is led by Orano in Dunkirk, which is called Neomat. That will prepare, do the pre-cam and cam to produce these cathodes used in the European batteries. A lot of added value will be done, secured here. And on recycling, there's some very interesting happening on magnets. There are 2 companies in France, Agrassource and another project near Bordeaux, where they are investing on the recyclability of magnets. And so these are interesting projects, useful and with a lot of added value in our country. Thank you. Niels.
And stick to English. I wanted to, first of all, it's great to be here. I wanted to start with 3 points. Taking a step back, right? I think it's clear that we have an issue with strategic dependencies and it's growing. Second, I think we are in the process of setting up instruments at the EU level that could make a difference, but that we design in ways that will make sure that they don't have any impact. And then third, I think in order to get out of this, we need a new Franco-German bargain. So let me start with the first one. So of course there is an issue with strategic dependencies, right? And it goes way beyond critical minerals. We've been discussing this ever since the pandemic, at least, our growing dependency on China. If we look into the numbers, it's remarkable how little progress there has been. Like dependencies on critical minerals, on batteries, on clean tech, growingly also on things like industrial robots is increasing, not decreasing, right? And I think what we have to bear in mind, if we look into the Chinese industrial policy plan, the 5-year plan for the next couple of years, this is going to increase, not decrease, right? The industrial strategy means that more and more of our industry will depend on Chinese inputs if we don't change course. So there is clearly an issue. But we should also be very precise about the nature of this issue. When we talk about resilience in the abstract, it sometimes gets lost that we are concerned about being dependent on countries that are known to weaponize dependencies. That's China. That's to a certain extent now also the US. We're not concerned about like depending on imports from South Korea for battery imports. We're not dependent on Austria for critical minerals. It's specific dependencies on basically the two big countries that we have an issue with, and that's the US and China. And we should be very precise about this when we talk about this. Second point, I think we are making progress at the EU level to come up with an instrument that could in theory help. You mentioned the Critical Raw Materials Act, Jean. I think the Resource EU plan that was published last year is even more important because it goes into the direction of operationalizing. How do we get there to some of the goals that are in the Critical Raw Materials Act? It's small and it will not fly without like real fiscal support from member states, but it's something. The second thing is in the Industrial Accelerator Act. For the first time, we will have a European preference for subsidies and public procurement in strategic industries harmonized at the EU level. And we're now talking about like a new diversification instrument on the trade side that is still a bit of an enigma, but the Commission is supposed to bring something out over the summer, right? So in theory, I think a lot of these things could help. The issue is that they are heavily contested, and that means that the Commission puts them out in ways that their impact is going to be marginal. I'll give you one example with the Industrial Accelerator Act, right? On paper, it's a paradigm shift. European preference harmonized across the EU in the single market. 2 years ago, for me, it would have been unthinkable that we do this, right? So on paper, in theory, conceptually, we're really moving. In practice, this is set up to fail. First, because the demand, so it's for batteries, it's for EVs, it's for clean tech, it's for some energy-intensive industries. But the demand it's going to cover, it's going to be marginal, right? The way the Commission has designed this, it would cover 3% of European steel demand, 5% of cement, about 20% of wind park equipment, less in batteries, large-scale batteries. Given that, in none of these areas, it will have any impact on investment decisions because we are over-fulfilling these criteria already. That's an issue. Second, it comes with lots of cost exemptions. So member states are free to opt out of applying these rules if they become too costly. And these exemptions are set in ways that basically make applying them optional across the board for most member states, which undermines the whole idea of setting up like common rules across Europe, right? So there's an issue by design in there. And it brings us in the worst of all worlds, right? Because on the one hand, these kinds of instruments and rules, they do create real costs, right? It's bureaucracy, it's additional red tape for companies, it's additional red tape for public authorities. But if we do this without having any economic impact, then we create costs without any gain in terms of economic, like industrial capacity or economic resilience in Europe, right? So I think this is my main concern here, that we're moving conceptually, but we're doing stuff in a way that they don't make much of a difference. So the big question is, how do we get out of there, right? And since we're in X, I have to propose that we need to come up with some new big Franco-German bargain. And I think there's one there, right? Because of course, I think both sides need to move. First, Germany needs to move and needs to understand, because traditionally, to be honest, Germany is on the side of watering things down as a export-oriented, trade-oriented economy. And the government needs to understand that like applying these things half-heartedly brings you in the worst possible spots. I think, to be honest, in Germany, we're getting there. We have a new debate on China in the last couple of months in Berlin, and I think the government is open to move on some of these things. But I think, on the other hand, the French side also needs to move. Because you have won the debate on economic sovereignty, on taking a tougher stance on China. The French have been seeing this coming earlier than the Germans, and you have won this, and you should enjoy it. But we shouldn't also overdo it, right? Because I think precisely because these are instruments to deal with the specific issues of China, partly the US, they need to be designed in ways that are open and trade friendly to allied countries, right? So that means, for example, we should, of course, if we design by European rules, they should be open to suppliers from countries like the UK and South Korea and Japan, right? If we take out these countries, we end up with a protectionist instrument, and there's no reason why we shouldn't compete on fair terms for batteries with South Korea. And of course, we need to diversify in many of these areas. So if we have a solar panel strategy, the goal should be to get solar panels from Southeast Asia, not trying to build a European solar panel industry that we've lost 10 years ago, right? So I think on that side, we need to move. And I think if that happens, if Germany accepts that these things need to bite, if France makes them trade friendly, I think we can have a deal.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to you all. My sense is that you don't disagree on the diagnosis. You have nuances on the prescription and on the feasibility of what is being advocated, right? So may I ask each of you to sort of take one point that has been presented by colleagues and respond to it. Perhaps, Reza, you wish to start?
Of course. Well, thank you so much, and I think it was very insightful, and kind of having the. We do not disagree, so we agree, but there's some different aspects. Maybe one thing that to Neil's point about especially in Europe, about the policy part kind of catching up is one elephant in the room is the grid capacity, right? So even if we find financing, if we find, the Serbian, mining, not being opposed by local people, but the grid is at capacity. And if we want to, in Europe, no matter where, I live in London, be it Germany, be it, anywhere, so it will take time. So even if we find those components of financing, of the, environmental cost that we can assume, but we have this very, very big problem of the grid capacity that we need to figure out how to fix that. So just put it out there.
Andre?
Well, actually, we disagree because, and it's in order also to, stir up the debate at 6:30 after a long day and a hot day. But, I'm French and German. These things about the French-German couple, the French-German bargains, sorry, Niels, I think it reminds me of the discourse yesterday of the Prime Minister. I understand a lot of people thought he was very insightful, and indeed, he's a nice guy, and you want to have a beer with him, and he's not playing it arrogant, etc. But when he said the state is at the middle of everything, I think we didn't get the world in which we are. The world in which we are is we need to be fast and with very calculated bets. Something that governments will never be able to be. We always expect governments to be fast, agile, and bold. They will never be. That's not their job. That's not their job. They need to set the framework. They need to set the North Star. But thinking that they will aggregate demand, thinking that they will, do an industrial meccano out of the BMW or out of Bercy, I think is an illusion, because you have a lot of people who are very good heart intended, but they are not very competent in what they are doing because they don't know the difference between rare earth or heavy between dysprosium and other rare earths. I think we need to have frameworks which are set. Which are the frameworks? Number one, that finding alternatives is absolutely critical. Where are the major research programs trying to find alternatives to permanent magnets. That's possible. I mean, Yasmine Belkaïd from Institut Pasteur at the inaugural session said we are living a golden age of research. Let's use AI for material science. That's, by the way, what DeepMind is doing. Where is it? No, we still have no connection between the guys doing the CRM part and the guys doing the research. So this transversality on is there a connection between our development policy, which I don't think we should call development policy, with Africa, and the rare earth discussion? Not really,
It's not
because,
called the development policy.
well, I know. So
National partnership.
that's called partnerships, and it should be called partnership. So my point here is to say, where is, and third, what governments could do is the convening power. What I'm struck, I mean, we have an initiative which is called the Minerals Initiative with the European Investment Bank, and we were struck just a couple of days ago to see that the automakers are ready for 10 cents less to buy cheap lithium. So it's very difficult for investors to plan long term. You have the miners who need to have a long-term approval, and then they hear that actually it will take them 10 years, and you need to have a Notre Dame process, which is an exceptional process. Instead of doing Notre Dame processes, we need to radically simplify the way we do, but we don't see that happening.
Okay.
So
I think
aggregation of
we got
demand,
your point.
research, and strategic foresight. What are the next rare earths or the next critical minerals where we are going to have a dependency? And they are pretty obvious in the next couple of years.
Nicolas?
Deux points pour faire écho à ce que vient de dire André.
2 points following what Andre said. The research on battery and it will be the ion lithium and maybe ion sodium. It does work, it's less performing, there's less density, wouldn't necessarily meet the needs of the automotive industry, but sodium is abundant, and maybe in 10-15 years we need less lithium and for what we are able to do. So AI, it's a major that this thing has to succeed with the rules we defined initially. So today we are being eaten alive, especially in the automotive industry by the Chinese who don't follow the same rules as we do. We set a framework initially which has not been applied. It is essential for these things to succeed, to protect the entire domain industry, in the automotive manufacturers and equipment suppliers and so on and so forth. It is crucial. This has to go through. Otherwise, we'll have a major social problems, lots of jobs, and political issues behind it. So prepare your questions because we after that I will leave to the discussion.
That you said that the governments can do it, and then you ask governments to do quite a lot of things. In aggregating demand, I mean, this is exactly the point of the Industrial Accelerator Act, right? Governments in the EU currently are doling out subsidies to EVs left and right. Public procurement plays a major role in the demand for energy-intensive industries, and of course, like when we decide to how do we who gets to tender in wind park auctions, governments have to take these decisions, right? So in that sense, I think we are bound to take regulatory decisions here, and we can't evade it. And we just need to understand, make the call: do we want to use that strategically? Yes or no, right? And I think what I've tried to outline is I think there's a pathway where actually these measures can help, and we are closer to a political agreement than we have been in quite some time. And I think then I'm quite confident that something will happen, right? I mean, the question is, and there's an issue of time, right? And the problem in all of this is that we need to walk and chew gum in parallel, right? So on the one hand, of course, we need to do big research investment programs in terms of batteries and new technologies for raw materials. But in the meantime, we need to decide whether we want to tariff Chinese imports or not. And again, I think that is decisions that we have to take, because otherwise, it's like if we let this rip. If there is no European car industry anymore, it's going to be very difficult to set up a battery ecosystem in Europe. right? So in that sense, I think the problem is that, like, of course, like governments can do only some things, but on all these things we need to take decisions, and we need to be quite fast about taking them.
Merci. On avait un
Thank you. We had an interesting discussion between a German who adopts a more Franco-French viewpoint and a Franco-German who adopted a more traditional viewpoint as is with Germans. As I said, I will open the discussion with the room. Who would like to take the floor? Take the microphone. I have a question, but allow me to do a brief history. No, very short, it's important. Mr. With the cap, you said that 2010. Well, it so happens that I have a book. I have a works, 80 kilometers. It says in 1965 that the Chinese were starting to have a plan on rare 75. More would say it was there, before that something. So don't come and tell us you didn't know. I have this document and I will give it to one of the members. And with Christian Stoffel, I was in the Quai d'Orsay at the time we created a group. I worked with Congo before, and we said, okay, well, have fun. I studied the problem and everything broke down. So this is an example of blindness. Second thing, rare earths are not rare and not new. It is Arenus, it is a Swedish military in a small city, Electria, discovered yttrium. And this is, and Steve Arenus is the one who worked on greenhouse gas, so gas effect. And we were leaders, but anyway, we must be sad to have lost that, but you said it. So, no question, you said it all. There is the problem of alliances. We know very well that in Washington, they want to be self-autonomous. Everybody says so. And Washington calls everybody in February, we have an alliance against China. So we said we don't want to align with the US, but China. But in fact, we allied with US, Japan, Pax Silica. Well, in my knowledge, France is not there because it wants to be self-contained, autonomous. So Europeans, well, the US, Canada, and so on and so forth. So, third question, what lessons can we draw from the failure of Lance Volta, bought by an American startup called Lithium, who will take the 5,000 people who were laid off? Are we going to see failures like that, or are we going to take up the challenge? I have 5 questions like that, so I'll shut up. I would like to react to that, especially on Pax Silica.
You want to take the question or the statement on Pax Silica? Yes. The Northvolt.
I can maybe then I can take Northvolt. But then you can maybe even more on that. So for me, the lessons there is that at the moment it seems to be very difficult for European companies to build their own battery production from scratch, right? I think there are some clearly not just managerial failures that were made that I can't really judge, but across the board we see the areas where this really takes off is when European firms partner with South Korean companies especially, right? And of course we see a huge influx of Chinese foreign direct investment into Europe, right? And of course, and the issue is that this is, like, if we take seriously what the Chinese have announced in terms of production capacity over the next couple of years, Chinese firms in Europe will be able to supply a big chunk of European demand from within the single market, right? So the question for me is a bit, how do we make sure that there is a technological catch-up that comes with these investments, right? And there the Industrial Accelerator Act has ideas, right? Making Chinese, and it's only about Chinese investments, to be honest, making Chinese investments conditional on tech transfer, on local sourcing, on employment. I think this is a very good idea. The question for me is, are we too late with it? Because the IAA is only going to come probably take effect in a year from now, 2 years on FDI. by then a lot of these investments will have taken place.
Sorry, why?
Because it's like the legislative procedure is until the end of this year, and then there's a I think a 6 months period until the regulation would actually take effect.
Yes, but that's the usual
Yeah.
delays, but you know, it can be anticipated. I mean, the
Yeah, but
government
this would,
can put forward
yeah,
their intention, and if companies know that it's coming, they're going to react already.
yeah, and the Chinese are reacting in speeding up investment before the rules bite, right? So that's, I think, the strategic issue here. So the question is, how do we make sure that some of these tech transfers also happen in like investments that have already been announced? And I think there we need answers.
If I can add something, we're also very schizophrenic. And sorry, I'm not going to make a lot of friends here. But when we have these Choose France debates, we don't ask ourselves whether we are not helping competitors to the very battery companies that we have in Europe, implanted right on the doorstep, competing for talent, which was the challenge at Northvolt, because you don't have a lot of talent that really knows how to industrialize these things, competing for resources and for electricity. So I think we are very schizophrenic, and on the speed part, I mean, I was just at Volkswagen on last Thursday speaking to some of the key managers, and in the evening, you probably heard, there was this big announcement on 100,000 jobs. I mean, this is happening under our eyes. The boss of Bosch was more or less fired 3 days later, which is unheard of in German industry. And Manfred Weber just announced, the head of the EPP, that if the negotiations with China don't work out by October, then we might be in a aggressive mode. It should be next week that we take this assessment. I think we still have a political class, sorry to point to that has not understood that time is the only resources. Just watch all the candidates to presidency. Their programs is about billions. The good news is that it's speed, the currency that counts. And this is something that is actually putting a challenge to our democracies. Can democracies decide much faster than they are? If we are not able to do that, we are cooked. If we're able to change, then there is a lot of hope.
Okay.
Another question? Jean, may I react to what was said about Norfolk? Well, what happened with what remained of Norfolk, it was a US company which bought the research lab. So it's more chunk, but interesting part which remained. 300 employees. So Norvolt is an initial failure, let's face it, but it's costly. It was the first to launch into battery manufacturers. You know, therefore they get the first problems. Without going into details, you know, we financed a competitor. There are 3 competitors left: Verkor, ACC, and PowerCurve in the major players. And so Norvolt had a very ambitious project. They wanted to cover the entire chain all at once. It was complicated with several plants, with the gigafactories, with very specific Chinese machines that they had to install in the first plant at the level of the polar circle. So there were staff to be taken there, energy. So it was a very specific choice. And so don't draw hasty conclusions. It was an initial project, very complicated, but don't draw impacts on the rest of the industry, which of course, like any, you know, it's difficult to do it, but they are not in the same situation as what's happening for Norway. Thank you. I was wondering if, in your opinion, do we have to do arbitration as to the usage of some resources vis-à-vis the demand, because there is limited supply? So, you know, do you have any ideas if we have to do kind of a regulation? Could you precise, you know, arbitration of the use of resources? Should there be domains to be fed for some limited resources? Should there be sort of a choice, a selection?
J'ai l'impression que ça laisse le panel
Is the panel worried, or I'm not quite sure I got your question. Okay. It's not an, just imagine that you don't have enough copper in the years to come, or in the decades to come, to meet all the demands for digital, energy transition, automotive industry. Should we have to make choice as to the domains that will be privileged for the, and if the answer is yes, do you have any idea of how this could be organized? So indeed, it is a precise question. Well, thank God we're not yet in an administered, we're not in an administered economy. Look about memories, chips. There's a huge boom on chips because data center operators can't buy them anymore. So when you buy your Apple, now the same Apple iMac or where you had 32 giga for the same price, now you will have 16. So arbitration will be done either through the price or the resource. Likewise, so the worries we may have is if some resources are on very strategic topics like, missile guiding systems, or, well, we'll put less offshore wind farms because we'll have less permanent magnet, or the price of the electrical vehicles will be very high. Hence, our automotive manufacturers will be even less competitive versus Chinese who will have direct access to the resource without limitations or export quotas. So it may turn against us, actually.
Just maybe to that as well. For Europe, right? So arbitration, what I heard, is more like putting a brake potentially. And as you mentioned, I think it's about the speed. It's actually putting your foot on the gas. And one thing which I don't see is, for example, as I mentioned, middle corridor. Rather than having limited, let's say, copper or critical minerals here in Europe, for Europe to be in those markets, to be in the places where you can offset, you can bring, because right now US, China, they're signing 10, 15-year-old offtake agreements. But when Europe will wake up and come to our part of the world, might be a bit too late because all of that will be bought. So rather than putting the brake, I would say that for Europe you need to be there and start signing those offtake agreements, and so people know, because right now the momentum is now. It's not going to be next week, next October, or next year.
Monsieur? Non, vous voulez pas? Oui, monsieur, au fond.
Sir, at the back. And then the gentleman in front, and they will stop. So, listening to you, I have the feeling that we consider that China is our deadly enemy, and don't understand why, because China is considered by Europe as the deadly enemy. Could you clarify? I didn't hear that, but I heard that China, for reasons of anticipation, capability of anticipation, has taken hold of refining of some rare metals and materials, and has a capacity to refining capacity, which is quite amazing. And when we allow something like this to take place, it comes a stage where countries, it's not China necessarily, but countries which are in a position of monopoly will use it. What I mean is that if Chinese are capable of selling electrical cars cheaper to Europeans, why should you refuse? Is this a reaction? Because I cannot hear what's being said. I cannot hear what's being said. Sorry. If you look, no, let's not go into historical discussion, but it's part of it. Now, if you look at the humiliation century. There were European products, American products who went to destroy the Chinese economy, and which inundated the Chinese market. And today we end up with quite the opposite. So the Europe today is facing the beginning of a century of humiliation, and this is why it's an issue. And the Chinese have been raised in the China is an existential threat because they won't make us to pay. So, gentlemen, ask the question first. Could you just sort out the microphones, please? Because I can't hear a bloody thing. I just want to come back to a country which was mentioned, which is the Republic of Congo. President Biden, before at the end of his term, went to there was into Angola next door, but then there was the president of the Republic of Congo. He talked about infrastructure corridors and so on and so forth. But recently, 6 months ago, President Trump received the president of the Republic of Congo and president of Rwanda, and if I understood, we talk about infrastructure corridor and so on and so forth. Republic of Congo is 110 million of people who speak French as an official language and teaching language. And the Republic of Congo is biodiversity, rivers, forest, equatorial forest, and it is of course lithium, copper, cobalt, diamonds. So what is the French strategy today? In the current context, to cooperate not in the old ways, but for true cooperation in this in the current environment. Thank you. I'm not sure someone is qualified to reply here, to answer. So I will give just one word to each of the members of the panel to close. One word, short.
Okay, maybe then just leaving you with one idea is I think one thing that would help a lot in terms of a lot of the clean tech and battery things we've been discussing is allowing production aid in Europe. That's one of the things where at the moment EU state aid rules rule out subsidies for OPEX. You only can do a CapEx. That is for a lot of, for example, batteries an issue because the problem is not capital, but it's like getting through a valley of death where you need to set up production. I think there's a simple change that you can make by allowing that, and that will help a lot. Ending with something concrete.
Thank you. Nicolas?
Très rapidement, je
I would like to react to the question that we have not been able to answer. I strongly believe that when it comes to minerals and raw material, we need international cooperations and with constructive and collaborative exchange on our side, because again, we cannot finance everything. We don't have the means to do everything. We have to define our priorities, work with friends within the framework of international cooperations, and then it will be First, look at the IPCEI, European Program of Common Interest. We put 6 billion in batteries. Roughly, we said, make better batteries. What we should have done is to say, take the best battery from CATL, which is the best Chinese, and we will give you 6 billion, if you can do batteries which are twice, 6 times, 5 times better than the current batteries. So we gave money to BASF, Total, Varta, which is almost bankrupt. Now, did we succeed in changing the situation? No. I lived in Beijing for 10 years, which is why I do what I do. I mean, I do have a lot of admiration for China, and somehow I agree with you. The problem today is not that China is doing well. The problem is Europe. We are so bad on. We were good, but we were not able to succeed because we are in process, and regulations is a process, and we are not in the mission. The mission is to have better batteries. It would be to have refining that would not cost. Which would be green. We were happy for 20 years that the South Sea refining of rare earths was in internal Mongolia. We don't want it in La Rochelle or Aix-en-Provence. This is what we have to do. Maybe one last thing about RDC, Republic of Congo. 73% of cobalt resource in my IFA, but 80% of refining of cobalt is controlled by China. So the disconnection. So I don't know what mining groups expect for in Europe to have major challenge and to invest, not to do development, but I mean, the French development agency, I think it has to be restricted entirely or even shut it down, and rebuilt it. But to make sure that, but I think this is we have to be bold enough in Europe, but do a true process and stop doing just small refining. Northvolt, the right challenge, but every morning there was a plane leaving from Stockholm, taking the engineers, coming back on Friday night, something mad. So come on, let's be sensible. Europe has to have technological challenges. Je pense qu'une des choses que je peux vous dire, c'est qu'il y a l'Europe doit accepter qu'il y a cette course Chine-USA. L'Europe n'en fait plus partie, mais identifier ce à quoi elle est bonne, l'ingénierie, les recherches, etc. Et trouver peut-être la France, l'Allemagne, le Japon, etc. Donc ne pas être là simplement dans cette course, mais de trouver l'endroit où ils peuvent être forts et se focaliser sur ça. Merci. Thank you. No word of conclusion. Time is short. Bye bye. Thank you.
Tous d'avoir participé à ce débat qui est essentiel.
Shall we do it?